Before I show you what the actual 8 cuts look like, I want to talk a little bit more about how we hold the sword and how we manage the cuts. The most important thing when it comes to holding the sword in this system is that we are using what we often in longsword call a hammer grip. That is, we wrap the hand around and the thumb as well. Okay? This is contrary to a lot of other saber systems, many of whom have the thumb up the grip. And while he does say to hold it in a hammer grip, his pictures and his images absolutely allow for something more akin to what we in longsword would call a handshake grip in transitional movements, because you don't want to break your thumb. So we have a good firm grip on the sword. Now the reason he says to do this and not to put your thumb on the back of the grip is because in the low parries, against strong cuts from below, that's how you jam your thumb and you get injured. He suggests not to do that and instead to stay in hammer grip, and then pictures suggest some transition into a handshake grip. The other thing to keep in mind is that he is very clear about how these motions are meant to happen, and he makes that clear by indicating within the text the position of the edge, the position of the spine in three-dimensional space, so either edge flat, edge diagonal, edge up, spine the same way. And then where your hand and the bell start and finish. So, assuming they all start from the guard, and then we are told that if we start here and end here in a flat position, like we have for the Flankenkick, or the outside cut through the middle, and we can assume we are here, the cut ends here, and the cut path is along this line. That gives us the information we need to do that. This becomes incredibly useful when you come to things like the half circle cut or the circle cut. It's an inverted wrist position in some of these, and he will actually tell you where your palm is facing. Which is how we know that the circle heap, which could very easily be much like the seconde, just up the middle, is not, but rather it's around it up the middle. Part of the reason I think he insists on the circle and the half circle being rotational like that is that in various other parts of the manuscript, we will see this rotational motion come into play. Be that in catching thrusts, in delivering of thrusts, and in protection or offensive protection with various footwork against thrusting opponents, be that with a saber or be that with a bayonet. The other thing to keep in mind is that these are wrist cuts. If we're looking at the Priem, we can see in other systems that these cuts can be thrown from the shoulder through the whole arm, which would be something like this, much like we get with a full moulinet. And while the full moulinet gives us an incredible amount of power, right? The full upper, all of this engaged, is an incredible power. It also takes time, and I think too much time for the basic attack. There are other situations where moulinet and that big motion, particularly defensively if they're coming in, and we just brush off their cut in some systems is quite effective. Nor is this an elbow cut. It's not the short moulinet. It is purely a wrist cut. And while there is still a feeling sometimes of that being somewhat rotated, is rotational, but there's a feeling sometimes of the blade coming around like a whip, like we have in a moulinet. The more we extend the blade before the cut, the less rotation you see at the tip. If I'm in my sometimes rather steep guard here, and even if I rotate just from the wrist, we get a circle. If we fully extend that, we get less of that rotation, and we cut down the time between the initiation of the action and the action itself. So keep that in mind when practicing these strikes and looking through the cuts, that they are meant to be done with the rotation giving the power and movement from the wrist, not movement from the elbow and the shoulder. The cases where this is less the thing is when there is no rotation from the wrist. There's no way to go from here and do this cut without putting a little bit of wrist and a little bit of elbow into it to get any sort of motion. The same is true here. But for everything else, there's some rotation, and the power should be gained from the rotation of the wrist with an extended blade. Keep that in mind.